Not yet. Not yet. Not yet.
Good evening. This is Kareem Bowen, and you've tuned in to another edition of United Shades of Gray. And today we'll be talking about checking the temperature for racial equality in America. All right, I'm so glad that you guys have decided to tune in today. This is a great opportunity for me to be able to spend this time with my WSGW family. All right, so I just want to say welcome once again. If you want to catch us live, you can always catch this stream live. You'll hear callers and insightful information, but you can always call in on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. And the number is 989-752-6111, and you can be a part of this conversation. It is a great conversation that needs to be had. So I want to thank you guys for tuning in and listening to WSGW 790 AM and 100.5 FM. All right, once again, if you're interested in calling in, that number is 989-752-6111. We're so excited. We're going to get going right here on today. I've got a very good show on tap for you guys on today. Somebody said, why are we doing United Shades of Gray? Why United Shades of Gray? I mean, I'll tell you, because what I realized over the past 2 years, especially with the things, the events that have happened in 2020, there is a serious need for a conversation. There needs to be a safe place where we can have space to talk about one of the most difficult conversations that we're ever going to have, and that's race in America. But before we get started, I want to give a shout out to my main man, the producer of this great show, the Rob Father. Rob, how are you doing
I'm
today?
fine, Kareem. Happy to be here for another segment, live segment of Shades of Gray, United Shades of Gray.
United Shades of Gray.
I don't want to call it Shades of Gray, just United Shades. We are united in this whole thing.
Absolutely. We're united in this whole thing. So I wanted you guys to get involved in this conversation. Make sure that you lean in so that we can begin to have a real meaningful conversation. You know, it's interesting, but I want to talk about what is hot off the press. We're going to talk about the issues that are hot off the press on today. And so I want to get into this, and we have an amazing young man that is going to be a part of our conversation. My special guest for today, none other than Dr. Brandon Irby. And he's going to be in, and we're going to be talking about, as I said to you today, checking the temper for racial equality in America. And I want to thank all of you guys that have already started tuning in. I've received some very good response. It was just initial show, just introducing myself and the concept of what we would be talking about on the air. But you guys have been excited about what's going on. I want you to share that word, pass it around, so that we can really begin to get into some deep things and talk about those things that we don't often get an opportunity to do so. So, hot off the press on today, number 45. For those of you who don't know me out there, number 45 is the name that I give to our dear, illustrious president of the country. But number 45, GSA, he's allowed GSA, which is the Government Services Administration, to go ahead and to begin the transition process. This is a very important piece that has been missing. It requires, or it allows for President elect Joe Biden to go in. I want to say that again, President elect Joe Biden. That means that there will be a transition of power, but it allows him to receive the funding that is necessary for that transition, along with the very high level briefings that are a part of that process, and access to national security information, and especially even more so, in addition to the national security, I don't say even more so, but in addition to the national security information, he also now has access to the plan and the what they're going to do with this new virus that we have going on, and how we're going to handle it, and how we're going to deal with the vaccinations, the dissemination of vaccinations. So I'm glad that we finally allowed, or we found an adult in the room to have that conversation with number 45. I think it's very important. And what I will like to say, and many times people are super critical, but if we go back and we take a look at Operation Warp Speed, I think it's called, which was his endeavor to get a vaccination. Many didn't think that it was possible, but I think that we've learned something here. And I hope that as we have conversations here on United Shades of Gray, that we would begin to understand something. When we work together, that's when we as Americans are at our best. And if there's anything that I will ever give credit for in this particular situation, I guess it will be that thing. So thank you, number 45. They have come out with the vaccination. And so we thank you. I'm glad you have finally decided to move forward. Now, I do want to have, because this is a very important conversation. As I was listening to the different political pundits and commenters that were having conversations about this, it appears to me, Rob, that many of the Republicans are yet implicit in, to a great degree, on this whole thing that he has won this election. Although privately acknowledging that it's time to move on. I want to thank, which I never thought would be the case, former Governor Chris Christie, who stepped up and he was very vocal. I think a lot of what he was dealing with changed when he found himself in the hospital suffering from COVID for
This
about
is
2 weeks.
the changing situation anyway.
Absolutely.
You have to actually experience something. But then, as we have seen with number 45, that's not been the case. So it doesn't apply to everybody, apparently. So it doesn't affect everybody the same way.
Because he was with COVID allegedly. All right, so but Governor Christie came up and said, "Stop it! This is dangerous. We've got to begin to move forward." And as I said to you guys on last week, it is very important, even though something may not be a law. Our societal norms are very important for us as Americans to be able to fall back on, to be able to have those as guides as we interact and we deal with one another. And so I am glad to see that we are now moving forward. However, we have not officially received a formal concession, and that there is still a purportation that he has still won. I'm going to move on from that. And I want to talk about this next issue that is here. And that next issue is this issue with Kyle Rittenhouse. And for those of you who are out there, and I'm sure most of you are aware of who Kyle is um, he is the young shooter that killed two of the protesters that were in Milwaukee during that entire piece of time. He has now been bailed out, and I thought this was so very interesting. By one of my child stars that I never ever liked. He was bailed out. He is now free until trial. The judge posted a $2 million bond on him, and so with the support of Silver Spoon star Ricky Schroeder and the My Pillow guy. I saw My Pillow. I was like, I'm gonna buy My Pillow. You see him on these most comfortable, washable, made in America pillow. Mike Lindell. I know Ricky Schroeder gave $150,000 of that $2 million,
Right.
and it was purported
And
that
he's just one of the celebrities that we know.
yeah,
I was surprised about that too.
yeah, there's a lot of celebrities that have supported him and they want him to be framed as a patriot and not a murderer. And so we'll get into that conversation as Dr. Irby is on. I'll have that conversation with him because it will be interesting. And as a matter of fact, he is, those of you out there for social media, I'm going to bring him in so that you can see that he's in this conversation as well. And so I just want to continue our conversation. And Brandon, I hope that you are listening. Dr. Irby, hope you are listening to what we're talking about because I'm going to ask for your input on this as we get to those things. And so I want to go continue with Rod. So we see this situation with Kyle Rittenhouse, $2 million bail. The idea was that he was protecting buildings from looters. Although the building that he was supposed to be supposedly protecting, the owner said he never requested any type of protection from him or the militia that he found himself becoming a part of. Um, they had a run-in with the police and the protesters earlier in the course of the day, and Kyle is saying that hey, the police told them that they were going to work hand in hand. They're going to push the protesters down to a particular area, and the militia would know exactly how to handle the situation from that point moving forward. So it's interesting. That's what's happening. But I am really kind of blown away. Silver Spoon, Ricky Schroeder, the show Silver Spoon, it talks about inherited wealth. It talks about living life in a position that you have an advantage based upon who your parents and grandparents were. And so it talks about this young man who came in because he finds out that he's the son of this very wealthy individual. Then he gets a little black flirting along the way too, of Alfonso Ribeiro, which was
Right.
a very interesting story. Always breakdancing. So we'll continue to keep our eyes and our ears on that conversation. But I do want to say in that particular situation, I am a lover of the Second Amendment. I believe in my right to bear arms. My family were hunters. I have several guns. I enjoy just going to the range and shooting and let. So I don't have any issues with those. But I do think that we need to have some controls, and I know that that is something that is very um, frowned upon for many people that are on the right. However, when we look at this young man obtained an illegal assault rifle in the endeavor that he was able to do when he committed that murder. Next, I want to talk about COVID-19. Oh my gosh, Rob, what is going on?
People not wearing masks, cases are spiking up, both in hospitalizations and people just ignoring everything. And so now we're in a part where the flu and that all mixed together. You just don't know.
It is, and I've been talking with health officials throughout the state of Michigan, and I was privy to a conversation that took place on yesterday with health officials in southern Michigan, and just the state of our healthcare systems that are currently they're all being plagued and they're overwhelmed by the number of cases of COVID that are coming. See, before this, when we first started this pandemic, what would happen because there were hot spots?
Right.
We could allow doctors and nurses, registered nurses, and healthcare officials. They would go and they would go to those areas and work in those areas, and then they would be able to give support and lend help to that staff that was there. But now every city, it seems, and even the small town, rural areas, are now hotbeds. And so we are at a shortage of healthcare professionals across the country. And now there are becoming those things. And it's crazy because, Rob, at the beginning of this, when we looked at this in March, and they said that by the end of this year, we have the potential of seeing 200,000 Americans die from this disease. I was like, what is this? This is, not some foreign, third world country. This is never going to happen
Mm-hmm.
in America. And now looking at this situation, and I'm blown away at what is going on, that I can't believe that we have actually hit those numbers. We are nearing 260,000. I think it was 259 when I.
1,000 cases being found out every day. And then we hear other countries that were so-called bad countries or whatever come successfully through this whole thing because they're following the advice of the doctors and doing what needs to be done.
You know,
So
I,
they
and
make America great by this.
yeah, I want. No pun intended.
Right.
I want to bring that conversation up a little bit later because what I recognize, and since we are talking about race in America, we want to have hard conversations on race in America. What I realized is that this was a very scary moment for all of the nation for the beginning period of what was going on. Initially, it was seniors, and we were concerned about our grandparents and mothers that were in nursing homes or senior citizens' homes. And then as we began to go, we began to see that there was really a smaller percentage of population that was strongly adversely affected. And as we as a nation began to see that population that was affected, to me, and this is just my perspective, it appeared that, oh, if it's not going to affect us, let's open back up the economy. Let's get back to normal. Oh, it's only a small percentage, let them die. And even to the point that during this election cycle, which is probably, and I want to applaud Americans. Those of you who are part of USG and then you're listening to this, United States of Gray, I want to applaud all of America for this historic turnout in terms of the numbers. I think that that is absolutely amazing. We are as good as our elections and our ability to decide who governs us. So I want to say congratulations to the blue, the red, the purple, those on the left to the yellow, and everybody in between. I think that is a great sign of how our democracy works.
I thought you were about to break into a rap just
No,
now.
not at all. Not at all. Why do I have to be the one that raps, Rob? I always
Well,
want to have the black man rapping. No, I think
you're the host. I'm just
I'm the
supporting
host.
you.
I got you. But what I do want to say is that, this is a serious disease. And at one point, it was being called the Democratic hoax. But it is now ravishing our nation. It's overwhelming our healthcare systems, and it has now killed nearly 260,000 Americans, and this is a serious issue. And the sad thing is that it did not have to be this way, Rob. It didn't have to be this bad. There were things that we could have done, but now we are suffering from what mitigation fatigue is the thing. We're tired of being safe. I'm never tired of being safe. That's the problem that's crazy to me.
Well, I mean, in the military, you never try to be sick because you learned about it. But see, I'm wearing a mask. My hands, I have constantly lotion my hands because my skin is the hands of my skin are rough now. So I don't mind doing it because I'm all about protecting myself. Because something I learned in the military. But then if you have a natural instinct for survival and the survival of your loved ones, you do what needs to be done regardless.
And so you can't weary in that process.
No, no.
All right, so I'm really just really those of you, if you hear this, if you hear nothing else other than this, please let's do what is necessary to keep ourselves safe, and it's very simple. Wash your hands, wear a mask, and watch your distancing. I want to get now. We're going to move in. I want to bring in our special guest for today. He's already out there. Those of you who are following us via social media, and I want you guys to share this conversation. I want you to share, get into this conversation because I have a young man who is, I think he's going to be great in terms of how this conversation plays out because he is well prepared. Okay, and he's going to be giving a call in to the studio very shortly, so that he can be a part of this conversation. And I'm really excited about him going to be on board with this conversation. But I want to talk to all of you as we're preparing for him to come in. I want to talk to all of you that are out there, and I want to ask you the question: how have you been impacted by this COVID thing? Let me know. Put it in our social media streams. Post it to the page. Get a hold of us. We're gonna get our caller in on at this moment. And Rob, he's here. All right, Dr. Brandon Irby, are you there, sir?
Yes, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you quite well. So Dr. Irby, I'm glad to have you with us on today. For those of you who are listening, I want to introduce you to Dr. Brandon Irby. He is a native of the city of Saginaw here. He is from the Michigan Bay region. He is an assistant professor at the University of Kentucky in Lexington. He works in the Department of Writing, Rhetoric, and Digital Studies and is a affiliate faculty member for African American and Afrikaans studies. That is a lot, Dr. Irving. Could you please say hello to our USG, our United Shades of Gray audience, and then also explain to us what that very that title means and what it is exactly that you do?
Yeah. So again, thank you for having me on the show. I always love being a guest on your show, speaking about these very important issues, and also, having another connection to my Saginaw community, Michigan community. So I'm now at the University of Kentucky, where I'm an assistant professor, like you said, in writing, rhetoric, and digital studies. What that means is I study persuasion, argumentation. Oftentimes, when we think about English courses, for instance, and writing, we always think about good grammar and sentences and paragraphs. But I look at the communication aspect of it and how do people communicate with one another, form arguments with the intentions of persuading. So that's the first part of my title. The second part with African American studies and Africana studies, really looking at how do Black people survive, how do Black people inform political culture, American culture, social cultures, right? And so thinking about the first part with African American studies, we know, how do Black people navigate the United States of America, whatever cultures, literatures, and languages that they use. But the second part, Africana studies, looks at the wider diaspora. And so when we're thinking about Black people in the world, we
Okay,
know that they
Dr.
come
Irby,
from,
Dr. Irby, I know you are
stop me.
coming from the world of academia, but
Yeah.
if you could please, when we talk about the word diaspora, I want us to make sure that everyone is going to be able to travel with us in this conversation. So just explain to you what you mean, explain to them what you mean when you use the term diaspora.
The diaspora simply means travel. How do people go from one place to another? And so when we say the African diaspora, That just means where did Black people go after they left the continent of Africa? So African Americans, we know, came to the United States. They came to South America. They went to the Caribbean. But they also traveled all across the world. And so just thinking about movement and disbursement, right? Where do people go in general? When we use that term diaspora, we understand that they started from somewhere as the origin, but then they navigated and moved somewhere else.
That was a heck of a cruise ship that took them to, you said, South America, the West Indies, and where else were Africans going from?
We went all over the world, and I think that's one thing that we need to talk more about when we talk about the plight of Black people. We often go to what happened in the United States, but Black people went all over the world. The slave trade was all over the world, and so really thinking about that as a Black history lesson in February. Really thinking about where did Black people go during slavery, and also how did they make identities for themselves in these different geographical places.
Dr. Irby, I know that one of the things that comes to mind when you say that, and I know that our listeners are probably going to have the same question, are where were the major concentrations of Africans going when they were leaving during the diaspora from Africa and being not on a cruise ship, mind you, not on the
Yeah.
Princess uh, or one of those other cruise ships, but on ships like the Santa Maria and the Nina Pinta and the other ships that were out there. Where were the majority of Blacks being transported to when they were leaving during this diaspora?
The interesting thing, I think, is many people don't know this, but most Black people went to South America and to the Caribbean. And so when we think about the Atlantic slave trade, shipping, people through this brutal journey from their homeland in Africa over to the Western Hemisphere, most people landed in the Caribbean. Thinking about your Jamaicas, your Haitis, and then going down to South America, Brazil, major slave landing spot there. And so then we went up to the United States, right? And so really thinking about
Well,
the
what happened to
history.
this concept? What happened to the concept of 1492? In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. I mean, so that was the discovering of America. So express that or explain that to me, I guess, while we're in this conversation before we transition.
No doubt. The Americas. I think this also will feed into our discussion about the United States of America and how we think of the U.S. as the ideal American region. But we have to understand Mexico is a part of the Americas. South America, all those countries down there are a part of the Americas. The Caribbean, like I said, are a part of the Americas. So Columbus, he went to the Americas, right? That wasn't necessarily the United States of America, but somehow we have this miseducation that when we're talking about America, we're only talking about the United States.
Wow. Okay, that's very interesting. I want us. There were a series of polls that I want to talk to you about because I find these things extremely important. And when you and understanding what you study, when you begin to have these conversations, I want to ask you, what do you see or where do you see the temperature of America is for conversations of race? And I'll use the term conciliation. We can't use the word reconciliation because that means that we are returning to a place that we were once in agreement and that place has never existed. So when you see us where we are today, where is the thermostat? Where is the temperature for racial equality in America?
It's extremely high, but I think it's always been high. What happens is, there are certain rhetorics, like I was saying earlier, that are amplified. So when we think about the culture and the temperature of racial, reconciliation right now, we always are thinking about, well, what is contributing to that? And I think right now we have people in very powerful positions who have the authority to tip the scale or to raise the temperature or lower the temperature. They have that power to do one or the other, and we see them just putting more grease on the fire. And so I think that's why it's so high right now, because it's just constantly being presented to us. But the temperature has always been high from my perspective.
And so when you say that the temperature is high, what does that mean? Does that mean that the atmosphere is conducive for this conversation? Or are you saying that we are still at polar opposites as it relates to our need for this conversation?
I think when I say it's high, it's because there's always work that needs to be done on the racial front. But what I will say is, with some of the events that have happened in 2020, we have a lot of people learning more about some of the racial inequities that are happening in our country, and they're now, being, um, I guess, forced to understand that it's a problem that they can contribute in. I think when we looked at some of the protests and demonstrations that were happening recently and over the summer, a lot of people were becoming invested into the movement. So those are good signs because it shows that more people are becoming aware that not only is it a problem, but there's something that they can personally do to try to fix it.
All right, that is so cool. I am so glad that you are here with us on today, Dr. Irby. I want you, first of all, I know that there's a lot of people that are in the Michigan Bay region that are saying to themselves, "Wait a minute, that voice sounds familiar." Why don't you quickly just give a shout out to? You got to say something to mom because she's out there. Listen, that's my baby. Just give a shout out to your mom real quick before we go to this first commercial break.
For sure. I got to shout out my mother, great mother, Melissa Ann White. She's the reason that I am, where I am today. She was able to raise me, nurture me, and put me in community with strong people in my circle to, keep me uplifted and motivated. So Melissa Ann White, I love you. And even if you look at all of my research work, you can see how important Black women, and Black mothers are to the world. And so I want to just shout out my moms. Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
All right, we're going to take a quick commercial break and we'll be back with more of United Shades of Gray and Dr. Brandon Irby. Okay, Dr. Irby. Okay, I think that we're on break now, so we can continue the conversation. Hey, how you doing, man?
Yeah, look, I was having some issues connecting and then I couldn't hear and I was like, let me try to figure it out. So
But you're
I'm
good
glad I
now.
got it. Yeah, I'm good.
All right, and I'm just trying to make sure that those who are out there, hopefully they can hear the conversation. I believe that they can hear us from our website as well, our web presence as well. So I just wanted to make sure that that's the case.
I
Okay,
called
so
in, so I don't know if I need to do anything else on that front too.
no, I think you're good as it relates to you calling in. You're on, right? You're on, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, so you don't have to do anything else. They've gotten you. Rob has patched you through, so he's going to make sure that you're there. But what I
Okay.
do want to say to those, Dr. Irby, as we look at this, and you were talking about something that I think is very interesting, and I just want to make sure, Rob, how much time do we have before we
Oh, give
come
me
back?
2 minutes before we go back.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to that concept of diaspora,
Well,
and
I should tell you that we're recording though, so I'll delete all this part here because this is not part. After the break, all that gets deleted. Then I'll start you.
all right, great, 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 great. When we talk about this diaspora, this where people have moved, the movement of us, and we look at you were saying South America. So when we look at this population of South America, we're looking at a strong population that is heavily invested in, if we were quote unquote, the motherland. And how does that play in the dynamics of the Americas, South Americas, the large presentation of Africans? They seem to be a completely different group of people. I'm sure there's a blending of races. What exactly were they met with when they got there?
Yeah. So on one hand, they are a completely different set of
You lost him.
people because
You lost him.
the
I think he's coming
social
back.
the social
You're gonna have to call back in.
let
Dr.
me see.
Irby, we lost your call. We're gonna need you
Oh,
to call back in. We lost your call.
I'm trying to navigate multiple devices here.
There you go. We hear you. We
Okay,
got you.
great,
He's
great.
going back in about 1 minute.
Real quick, we got 1 minute before we go back on the air. Go ahead.
Yeah, so what I would say is because the United States culture is different from the culture of Brazil, the culture of Peru, the culture of all these other countries. And so that's going to really shift how Black people see themselves in the cultural dynamic. But on the one hand, they're still Black, right? And there's still this idea that the lighter your skin, the more privileges that you will have within that culture. And so we still have some issues that you can see in Atlanta, Georgia, and you can also see in a city somewhere else within South America about racism, because no matter where you are, the politics of Black identity still remain the same under this whiteness or white supremacy lens.
That's awesome. All right.
Ready?
Yep.
All right, stand by. Wait for the guy to talk and then I'll join you.
All right, we're back with more of our conversation today on taking a temperature check on the conversation and the temperature for racial equality here in America. And I have my special guest for today, Dr. Brandon Irby, from the University of Kentucky, Lexington, Department of Writing, Rhetoric and Digital Studies, affiliate faculty member of African American and African Afrikaans studies, which he has now equipped us to understand. It's talking about the diaspora, the movement of blacks from Africa and where they went to. We're having a great conversation here. If you would like to get involved with this conversation, by all means, you can call us right now at 989-752-6111. You can also get involved with this conversation via social media at United Shades of Gray on Facebook Live. And I want you all to know that this show will actually air at 7 p.m. on Sunday, but you can get a part of this conversation and get going right away. All right. So I want to get back to this conversation with Dr. Irby. Dr. Irby, polling has shown, and I was looking at two different pollings opportunities that have taken place, but it has shown uh, that we still have a serious reckoning to deal and a long way to go as it relates to how we view racial equality in America. And the most recent Gallup poll that was taken in 2019, this is just before the George Floyd issues and the cries for social justice and police reform were hitting. It came down to three key things that were takeaways, and I want to share these with you, and then I want your thought about this. One, that blacks in America today continue to report living a life in which they confront bias and discrimination on almost all fronts. Number two, that Americans are no more positive about race relations today than they were in decades past, and in some instances are less positive today. And then the last thing is there is a substantial gap between whites and blacks' perceptions of the positions of black in America today. What are your thoughts when you hear that as being the outcomes, the three core outcomes from this National Gallup poll? What does that say to you, and what do you think about?
Well, it's tough for me to disagree with any of those things, because if you want to look at just you know this year, for example, 2020, well, we see COVID-19, and we also see all of these protests and demonstrations against the murders of Black people. These are traced back to systemic issues, right? COVID-19, of course, can infect anyone, and it's a very lethal virus and disease. But the reason that we see disproportionate numbers of Black and Brown people, being killed from the disease is because of disparities in the healthcare system, right? Where Black people, for instance, may not have good health insurance. They may not have access to good doctors. When they visit hospitals, the doctors may not see their issues as legit issues. This goes back history, right? And during enslavement, Black people were known to tolerate pain more than white people. And so it was this understanding that you don't have to even get medical treatment and care because you can tolerate that pain. And so just thinking about the systemic issues that are part of this country, policing is one of them, and we see how that has happened for many years now.
Now, Brent, I want to talk to you about what you just said as it relates to the word or the phrasing systemic racism. There are so many people, and we saw this play out this year with number 45, and that's how I refer to him because I really respect the office of the presidency. So I don't want to say anything that may come off disrespectful to the office. Um, but what I will say is, as we saw this year and erupt into this global protest against the social injustices of Black men in particular, we saw our president take a stance that um, where he began he put did a memo, or he actually did an executive order banning racial bias training and things that would actually help us to understand one another. When you talk about systemic racism, there are a lot of people who don't believe that it exists, as does not he. So when you think of that, what do you say, and explain to our listeners what systemic racism is and what it looks like?
Yeah, it's. I'm gonna try. I'm gonna try. But when we think about the history of this country and we think about racist acts, we always think about the very in your face, physical, violent acts towards someone else, right? So often we think about the civil rights movement. The narrative of the civil rights movement, how you had these innocent people and you had white people in power putting vicious attack dogs on them, throwing ketchup and mustard and on them at sit-in counters and things of that nature. So we can see racism literally in those ways. Systemic racism is about the ways that the daily lives of people are affected by structures and systems and apparatuses. We really can't see what's going on, but we would have to think about how are the daily lives of people affected, right? When you think about education, when you think about certain schools within cities, why do certain schools have access to good teachers while others don't? Why are certain schools being closed down while others are getting boosted in funding? Right? When you think about what I was saying in healthcare, why do people have access to healthcare and others don't? Right? When you think about housing, why do people live in certain houses in certain neighborhoods and other people live in big houses in other neighborhoods? Right?
Well,
These are systemic issues.
well, Doctor Irby, I want to challenge that thought process. Let me play devil's advocate for a second here.
Yeah.
You gave some examples there, but what do you say to the individual that's out there? Because I've heard this story this a million times. Well, my parents came to this country and they were immigrants and they had nothing, and they worked hard, and now they were successful, and blacks in America are looking for people to give them a handout. When we came here and my parents were successful, they were immigrants from Poland, so to speak, just as an example. Uh, what do you say when we have this conversation of systemic racism, and that is the response of someone that comes in like, hey, maybe you just have to work hard. You got to stop looking for a handout, and maybe that will change your plight in life.
Black people have always worked hard. I think, the difference between an immigrant and someone who was enslaved is that there was no opportunity for Black people in this country other than slave labor. And so we have to, first, remove the different types of languages between, immigration and enslavement. I think that's number one. But also thinking about, the history of this country against Black people and in helping them or preventing them, right? Every movement or historical moment in this country has, advanced Black people, but then pushed them back. So we came from slavery, and then, okay, emancipation came, but then we had, Jim Crow. Jim Crow, we kind of navigated it, as much as possible, but then mass incarceration. President Obama, we are post-racial. We have a Black president. And then Donald Trump, and just eradicating, like you were saying, all of these sensitivities to racial issues. And so we just need to have this history where it's just this ebb and flow. We go and improve, and then we go back. There's every process or understanding of, well, I made it, I was able to do it. There's history of Black people doing that as well, but then there's also backlash, right? Lynching in this country was because Black people were succeeding. So we had to then violently take them out. And so that's where
Can
that
we can we
conversation for me is
can we
kind of
talk,
going.
because that's powerful. I want you, and I know that this is what you do, Dr. Irby. I want to thank you for enlightening our callers in this conversation, or our listeners in this conversation, because I think that you're very spot on with what you're saying. One of the someone else out there, Frank Sanders, is saying, "Bingo, you hit the nail on the head." You were talking about how lynchings became necessary, and that's exactly he hit me exactly where I was going to go. The Tulsa massacres with Black Wall Street. Lynchings were a response to blacks doing well, and beginning to create storefronts and beginning to create communities where there is a store, a convenience store, a grocery store, whatever. Those types of things now becoming formative in our communities, and then we see lynchings. Our One of our viewers said they brought up the idea of the Tulsa massacres, or Black Wall Street. Why is it that there is this ebb and flow? You were talking about this ebb and flow. We would make some progress, and then that progress comes as backlash against us. If you were to look at, and we were to take a look at race in America and how we viewed race during the height of President Obama, the years leading into his presidency, there was a great hope and a great push towards conciliation of the races. And at the end of his presidency, we see a complete dive down to 40% or less of America thinking that we were at a place that we were actually racially sensitive and ready to move forward. And then this president, many people have said, is the response to a black president. So number 45 is a response to a black president. As you look at that ebb and flow, what how do we get out of this system of continually rewarding and having some movement forward, and this extreme backlash backwards? How do we change that dynamic?
It's very difficult to do. I just to be very very frank with you, but I
Do you
think
think we will ever see that dynamic change here in America? Are you hopeful of that?
I'm I'm, I'm hopeful that for me change works on the bottom and then it goes up. So what I'm hopeful in is that people on the ground, people in our local communities, people who are just everyday individuals on their job, who are teaching, who are going to work, making a life of for themselves, are able to see what's going on and impact their inner circles, right? Make change that way. What kind of worries me a bit is that it's going to be slower for the change to be from the top down, because as we see with this presidential election this year 2020, you have people who want to stay in power. This is why you have a presidential election that was over 3 weeks ago, and yet you still have people saying, oh, we don't know who's going to be the next president, because they want to hold on to the power. We need to get rid of that understanding that power is important, and then start thinking about community and welfare, and making sure that we are constantly trying to become a more perfect union. That's what Barack Obama would say, right? We will never be perfect, but we're trying to be more perfect in our daily lives, right?
But isn't that what the framers of our Constitution even said? They were saying that in order to form a more perfect union. And so the idea is that we would move and continually progress forward. But why do we continually see these things where we are continually challenged to move, we have some progress forward and then we move backwards? Becomes a major dynamic, I think, that we have to consider. Dr. Irby, you know what? There was a conversation on last week. It was funny. My first show that we were doing, my mother called in. And I was like, oh, everybody's mom. Let me call in. Let me say hi to my baby on he's on the radio. This is actually my second show. But one of the things that she brought up is that she always told me that I had to make sure that I worked hard and was twice as good. Now, who have the ability to see this conversation, and it may be lost to those who are listening to it on the radio at 7 p.m. on Sundays. You are a very young man. You're a young man. And you would be considered a millennial. And there's a reason why I chose you for this conversation. Because your generation sees the opportunity and the possibility of equality very differently than even my generation. I am an ex-gener. You see things very differently than we do because of you've never lived in a society where race and racism were so overt in our country. So the idea of being equal is something that you were born into. When you begin to look at this and you look at, were you given those same types of hints or stories that my mom, as an ex-gener, gave me? She's a baby boomer, I'm an ex-gener, and she would say you got to be twice as good because the world is always going to be fighting. When you run into a police officer, you've got to do X, Y, and Z. Make sure you, were you given those types of cues as to living in America as a black man?
No question about it. I think uh, every black person in America is given some form of this conversation, known in our households as the talk. It's something that I've researched and I've written about. Really thinking about the importance of the lived experiences of Black people. This was a debate question for Joe Biden and Donald Trump. During one of their debates, the conversation that Black people have to have with their children about how to navigate the United States of America because of racial bias and systemic racism and all of these things. And so I think this is a question, like you were saying earlier, about hope and possibility and optimism, because although you know that there are certain things happening in the world, and although you know that your skin color can give you a host of problems or bring a host of problems to your lives, we also hold fast to the idea that tomorrow will be better. And I think what the talk is it's in this conversation is it's not something that should scare children or to scare you to think that, oh, you got all of these marks on you, right? But it's also to show that no matter what these marks are, you can still finesse, navigate, survive, and do what you have to do. Just understand, what's going on. And so it's a idea of racial conscience more than it is of, this is what's going to happen to you.
I can attest to that too, Dr. Irving, because I tell my son, he's 24, the same advice, having grown up in the 60s, I give him the same advice, not to scare him, but to make him aware, because people see his skin color before they see who he is as a character first. And this is just the way America is. So I
Mhm.
agree with you 100% on that, because if all fathers and mothers did that, then they're not scaring the children, they're just preparing them as part of the learning
Prepare.
process
Yeah.
for a black American.
Dr. Irby, I want to ask you this question. What advice would you give for individuals who are struggling to understand, there are a lot of people who feel like, hey, we've had a black president. You brought that up. We've had a black president, things are great for black America. There was a poll that 65% of African Americans feel that being black is yet a hindrance in America, where that same number was 35%. I think it was a Quinnipiac poll, that 35% of whites in America think the same way towards black men. Like they think that things are pretty evil. I mean, pretty even. They don't see it as a hindrance. What would you say? What would you share with our counterparts? Because here on WSGW, this is predominantly a white radio station. What would you share with them to begin to challenge them to take an objective look at how things are and maybe to give them some perspective of where you stand?
Yes, I think the United States is a country of narratives. And so whatever is the dominant narrative, that's what we will think. And so when we think about Black people, the dominant narratives always seem to come through, our media. So our music, our television, our film, our sources of entertainment. And so when you think about that, what happens to Black people in these things? We see them as athletes, we see them as singers and rappers. You turn it on the news, we see them as victims of police brutality. You go to your child's school, and they may, if it's a good school, there may be a couple of Black kids. If it's a poor school, the whole school is probably Black, right? So really thinking about, well, how do we see Black people in these spaces, because that will then become the dominant narrative of how we think of Black people. What I would want to say is we need to challenge these narratives, right? Because even if you think about, what's happening to these victims of police brutality, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. We get those stories, but we don't get the stories of how great parents they were, of how they thrived in school. Breonna Taylor was fighting COVID-19 the night before she was killed, right? And so we need to challenge these narratives of Black people as deficient, Black people as beggars, Black people as, not hard workers, because those are simply not true. We just buy into these dominant narratives. And so that's what I would say, because if you looked at me 10 years ago, you'd be like, oh, Brandon Irby. I mean, there's some things there, but at the end of the day, single parent, he's Black, he's coming from Saginaw. There's no way that in 10 years he's going to have a doctorate degree, right? So we have to challenge these narratives that we put on Black people, Black bodies, Black identities, Black cultures.
Wow. I think that's very powerful. Being a young Black man in America, growing up in a community you grew up in a community that was racially diverse, but you went to school in an educational situation that was not as diverse racially. What would be the thing that you would share to if there were another young Black girl, young Black man as yourself that was growing up dealing with the disparities in education, dealing with the disparities at home economically? What would you give them to encourage, to strengthen, to empower them to do what you have done?
Yeah, for me, I talk about my story all the time, and I think it was interesting because I went for high school. I went to a majority white school, but outside of my schooling, I was with Black people most of the time, right? At home, at church, and like my community organizations. I was a member of the Gamma Kappa Kudos, right? And so, really thinking about how I was trying to navigate my different social spaces as an adolescent is something I think about all the time. But for me, it was when I went to school. Obviously, this is the most important because that's where the white people were. And I think we have this idea that wherever we see more white people, it becomes this idea that that's more important, that's more formal, that's more serious. And so that's where we need to put our attention. But after I graduated from high school, I went to a historically Black college. And so that just kind of flipped those thoughts that Black people can actually be serious and formal and educated and well-trained and knowledgeable and experts in particular fields and subject matters. And so what I would say is to, these young kids is that keep being who you are. Like it's a privilege and to be Black. Like even though all of these issues are happening, right? You go on Twitter and social media, we're making these memes, we're making all of these, great things on the digital sphere that people would not give us in another platform, right? So that's a whole nother topic of how Black people carve out spaces on social media and online platforms to challenge what I was saying earlier about these dominant narratives, right? And so just understanding of being true to who you are and understanding that, you are more significant than the dominant narrative says that you are.
Okay, I want to. You kind of touched really quickly, and I want to give you about a minute because we only have a couple minutes before we close out the show. An hour goes very fast.
I see.
The idea of code shifting, code switching. A lot of times we find young Blacks that are pushed in situations in the same. This is one way here. It's this way here. What would you say, and explain to America what code shifting is, code switching is, because many people would have no clue if you're not from one of our communities.
Yeah, so code switching is this idea that, wherever you are, there's a formal situation or a formal way that you kind of navigate the space, and then there's an informal way that you kind of navigate the space. And based off of who the audience is or what the situation is, you can turn it on or off like a light switch. And so for Black people, it's, you're one way when you're with Black people, you're another way when you're around white people, because of this idea that whiteness has power to kind of cultivate or to instill who you are in that particular moment. And so you don't want to look like you are of someone with no sense, right, when you're around
Right.
white people. But what I've understood now is that can be very detrimental as well, right? It's something that it works well, but it can be detrimental. And so we just have to be more smarter on how we navigate code switching. It's
Well,
useful, but unuseful.
Well, I appreciate it. Dr. Irby, we're going to have to get you back on here. I want to close us out. And in the words of Michelle Obama, race and racism is a reality that so many of us grow up learning to just deal with. But if we ever hope to move past it, it can't just be on the people of color to deal with it. It's up to all of us, black, white, everyone, no matter how well-meaning we think we might be, to do the honest, uncomfortable work of rooting it out. And I long for a day when we no longer live divided, but being black or white, but we will truly become United Shades of Gray. Thank you all for tuning in, Dr. Irby, and we'll see more of you guys on United Shades of Gray. All right, Dr. Irby, I appreciate you, man. A great conversation. I am putting together and I know that this is going to come up. You were very good in, I think, laying a pathway to understanding from historical perspective, moving towards some of the conversations that we're having. I was quite impressed. I'm sure some of the listeners were as well. But the show will air on Sunday at 7 p.m. My desire is because next week I have a Jewish, I say a white Jewish woman, she's a Jewish woman, Shapiro, that will be coming in and having a conversation because you know that relationship between Jews and blacks has always been strained as well. And if you look at what Nick Cannon has recently done with the statement that he made, and then backtrack 1000%, it becomes evident that there has to be some conversation there as to why that exists and then what can we do to change that. But I want to bring you back probably in a couple of weeks on a panel with a couple different individuals to have this conversation between a white and black panel of individuals and understanding historically and where we are today. But how do we stop that ebb and flow that you were talking about, where we have some gains and then are thrown back 10 decades with a movement that takes place currently? But I want to appreciate you. Thanks for your time and tuning in today and being a part of this conversation. You were absolutely amazing, man.
Thank you for having me. You know, it's tough trying to answer your questions. You ask the deep questions, and I need to break it down and give you the layers. But yeah,
No,
thanks
yeah,
for having me.
no, but I think you did a great job with doing that. And so we'll get on there and we actually, I think what we're probably going to do moving forward is we'll have the show and then we'll have the after show where we can get into more of that
Yeah,
conversation, maybe 30 minutes at the end of the conclusion of the show that's on air. But thank you. 7 p.m. on Sundays, and you can catch it on their website, WSGW. I'll also send you the link and the information about the show.
cool. Sounds
All
good.
right. Thank you, man. Take care.
Yes, sir. You too.
All right. God bless. Yep.